I have a lot to say, so please bear with me. It will become clear that what I have to say is of utmost importance to everyone on this planet. I will take questions after I put my ideas down, and I will try to answer all questions fully. When I graduated HS in 2011 and knew I wanted to study computer science, electrical engineering, and physics, I also thought a lot about continuing a military legacy in my family. My older brother, dad, and his dad were all enlisted. My highest grades were in these areas. My school was lucky to have a computer science course before it was as common as it is now, but I never struggled in school in general. I was enrolled in DROT for a short time and was recognized for leadership with various accolades. This put me on the path to a military education, and even though I was unsure about a military career, this path was inviting and already open. Immediately after graduation, I went into the U.S. Air Force Academy for Physics and eventually graduated with a major in aeronautical engineering. I was in the top 5% of the class, made Dean's List, with most of my projects involving satellite design and space operations research. I was commissioned as a second lieutenant following graduation from the Academy with an Air Force Specialty Code, AFSC, in Air Force Space Command. In a few weeks I started undergraduate space training, UST, for about a year, attending the Space Operations Officer course at Vandenberg Space Force Base, focusing on orbital mechanics, satellite operations, and space surveillance. My first assignment started in 2016 with the Satellite Control Squadron. My unit was the 50th Space Wing at Schriever Air Force Base. I was promoted to first lieutenant and then captain by 2020. There I contributed to the Space Fence program and assisted with development on the X-37 vehicle series. This period coincided with the founding of U.S. Space Force. With this, the U.S. Air Force Space Command structure shifted to the Space Control Squadron organization. I transferred from the U.S. Air Force to the USSF with a promotion as an 04 Major, with a focus on space operations and technology acquisition. My first assignment within USSF was to Space Operations Command, SPOC. In about 14 months I was promoted to 05 Lieutenant Colonel, and placed in command of a Space Operations Squadron. We managed launches, monitored satellite constellations in real time, etc. One of the first major operations we did was to monitor China's ongoing Taigong assembly launches. At this point I was being vetted for the Air War College and participated in collaborative missions with private sector entities like SpaceX and Boeing. Many around me believed I was on the path to Chief of Space Operations, a position that would have involved a promotion to full colonel with general on the horizon. I ultimately decided against pursuing this since the position is not vacant and there's no obvious time when it will be. However, I didn't alert any of my career aides on this decision and continued to accept new commissions. Around this time, late 2022 to 2023, I was vetted for a secret USSF organization. Let's call it Advanced Off-World Operations Command, or AOOC, not the real name but similar. This group, unlike most USSF organizations, did not report directly to the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the National Security Council. They have total classification authority and inhabit need-to-know/privileged segments of intelligence authority. They answer to another similarly secretive group that by all measures appeared totally clandestine and did not have any apparent obligations under information/classification law. These are my assumptions anyway. Even in my organization, only the Supreme Commander and Deputy Operations Commander and myself knew of the existence of this body that served us orders regularly. In the interest of protecting myself, I will not expand further on my career. I intentionally changed a few important details to prevent my person from being identified. However, I believe I provided sufficient information to dispel any questions concerning my legitimacy. My first day at AOOC began with an unraveling of the ongoing military and scientific operations occurring beyond Earth. Moving forward, I will identify all aspects of the Black Off-World program as being part of AOOC, although this is not really the case. In reality, there are several compartmentalized organizations that conduct these operations. The first thing that really shocked me was how these operations are conducted in a way allowing them to remain totally hidden from the public and lower-tier military orgs. A lot of this is very subversive and damaging. I learned that some instruments including JWST had been deemed conflicts of interest with my organization, and to the dismay of NASA many aspects of the mission were scaled back and delayed. Many in NASA think the final mission JWST is allowed to perform is basically pointless. That's how broadly its capabilities were reduced. It's obvious that without these measures many telescopes would represent an existential risk to off-world operations. The moment I realized exactly what was happening to civilian space exploration, how it is being targeted by not just our organization but similar groups led by our adversaries, I began to wake up to my role in these programs. If you are reading between the lines here and you understand the difficulties JWST faced before and during its early mission, your paranoid thought is most likely true. We did similar things to the unmanned Orion lunar flyby mission and various other measures to reduce the lifespan of the ISS. You can also attribute the defunding and eventual destruction of Arecibo with these concerns. More than a few of the now famous signals that have been presented as SETI candidates were in fact leaked signals from off-world operations. There is much more information about these operations than I have time to discuss in detail, so I will work through them, starting with those on and nearby Earth and moving deeper into space. Black terrestrial infrastructure. There is a network of underground facilities across Western Europe and mostly in the eastern US, with a transcontinental line connecting all of them running under the seafloor, that are revealed to people in these orgs, on a need-to-know basis. The President is aware of one of these, operated by the State Department, serving as a doomsday shelter for Congress and other elected officials. Several presidents have actually spent time here and delivered addresses from it when global tensions are high. During the first 4 weeks of the Ukraine invasion, these facilities were more heavily used than any other time in the last few decades. This network provides the industrial base necessary for ground-launched operations. Most of the emissions produced are from the biggest industrial center located at the South Pole. You can actually see these emissions from almost any geospatial service offering atmospheric analysis. Secret launch facilities. There are several of these, mostly served by submarine bases and the aforementioned underground tunnels. The tunnels tend to be used to transport materials and submarines transport staff. The largest and oldest facility is located on the South Pole, with several independent launch pads that are used seasonally depending on ice conditions. These are built so that when the ice shelf recedes they are still covered in a column of water between 50-100 m. This prevents detection by satellite and allows ships to be launched through the water like an SLBM. Overland facilities are concealed by placing them in wilderness regions with heavy camouflaging. If you are older, you'll remember the English TV show Thunderbirds, where they had an island that looked natural but the ground opens up to reveal an underground base. These facilities are very impressive and well protected. Launches take place in coordination with SpaceX launches to add plausible deniability if the vehicles are spotted by amateurs. What do you know of the propulsion tech used by these groups? If you really want to help, you can help start a grassroots effort to develop and spread blueprints of the simplest to build free energy device. This would precipitate a crash of oil stocks and the whole system. Break the whole thing open. There is no other way to get back control. I followed the JWST development throughout its entire existence. I don't think that's true. The delays actually led to a significant expansion of its capabilities over time. The initial mission was much more narrow and the instruments have so far exceeded expectations. JWST revolutionized fields like exoplanetology and cosmology practically overnight, as soon as it was operational. Maybe NASA folks knew about even better options that were on the table. That has happened before. With NASA getting scraps left over from the intel community or having to curtail missions for such reasons, but if so, there was no indication of that attitude among members of the team doing commissioning. Division 1. Low Earth orbit, high orbits, OBO. Low Earth orbit. Due to the density of private satellites in low Earth orbit, there is little interest in maintaining advanced platforms here. There are a few satellites concealed as civilian with various sensors for detecting/monitoring underground facilities. High orbits. This is where a constellation of platforms known as the Orbital Defense Perimeter, ODP, operates. These are unmanned platforms with nuclear pump-directed energy weapons like the Cassava howitzers designed for SDI, Star Wars. Ironically, the ODP really has no part in keeping things out of Earth orbit and mostly exists to keep things in. It is very common for these platforms to interdict scientific probes launched by adversary nations and damage them, as well as the obvious role of keeping adversaries from building their own orbital military infrastructure. Some of these installations date back to the early 1970s and have been refitted extensively. Orbital Black Ops. The function of the OBO arm is not dissimilar to the ODP discussed above, but is led by a constant human presence in space instead of being automated. Most of what they do is related to intelligence and management, but they do have several reaction forces that can reach any location in Earth's sphere of influence very quickly. These forces are trained for zero-gravity combat and are deployed to sabotage installations and satellites when a finer touch is needed. As far as I am aware, the OBO sometimes work in conjunction with the CIA and NRO, National Reconnaissance Office, though as mentioned earlier this is never a two-way stream of accountability or information. Division 2, ASC. Advanced Starship Command, ASC, manages commissioning, training and deployment of officers aboard starships capable of interstellar travel and conducts missions in the outer planets. They are capable of infiltration, combat operations, and rescues in space or on other planets. There are basically two distinct types of ships used by the ASC, Phantoms and Sentries. Their design is identical but scaled to very different sizes. The Phantom ships are between 800-1200 m and the Sentries are 60-80 m. Without depth perception they appear identical. Phantoms have the designation OXS and are interstellar capable. The crews are trained for a very long time and develop biological synergy with the vehicles that allow them to function. Theory of operation of the interstellar drive is difficult to explain even with my physics background. It uses photon adsorption to accelerate photons in a small area and tricks space-time into thinking this volume is traveling in its own isolated reference frame. The drive produces a lot of photons and adsorbs all of them in a circuit of beryllium and mercury. The mercury condenses after absorbing enough photons to pump up its electron shell and releases time-reversed photons back into the drive. Again, basic theory of operation for this system is a 49-page document and not really digestible in a single sitting. The Sentries lack an interstellar drive and instead operate a cluster of electrogravitic drives that work by coupling with planetary electrical/gravitational fields. Most of this is accepted standard model physics. ASC ships have water and solid-state fusion reactors. They carry defensive shields that also function as offensive weapons by employing the time-reversed photon principle. All of these systems are managed by biological wetware systems that are partially conscious and interfaced with computers. Humans can plug into these systems. The biological component either originates with a human, Phantoms, or a 7-armed octopus, Sentries. The latter is more unreliable and is not used in direct interface with a pilot, while the Phantom systems require a human pilot for navigation. The Sentries mostly use this biological component to manage the fusion reactors and defensive armaments. Division 3, ETR. Extraterrestrial Threat Response. Part of the reason why this experience has been so eye-opening to me was the process that was put into motion the very first time I became aware of ETR's existence. When you see that phrase across the top of a document and start digesting the capabilities of this organization and its legacy, it is a daunting thing. The first iteration of the ETR began long before my career or the founding of the USSF and is more akin to the legacy of the US Air Force. We've had military space capability since the 1950s, and our Earth-bound adversaries have since the 1930s. Anyone would respond to seeing these words with great expectation, if not outright existential terror. I considered the possibility of these organizations not existing at all and being part of a psychological fitness test to see if I would ask too many questions about the secret alien war. It turned out, there is no war at all. I'll expand on this later, but I think it's important to say upfront how much of this activity in space is actually very similar to the political posturing that occurs on Earth between nations that perceive themselves as empires whose needs transcend all other concerns. This division coordinates first contact protocols, intelligence gathering on extraterrestrial technologies, and, if necessary, the deployment of new defensive space assets. They have access to the most destructive weapons in the arsenal, such as antimatter weapons. I will note antimatter weapons have only been tested at very small scale. Solar flares were used to mask these tests from detection. Anonymous 09/06/24, Friday, 21:04:49 No 387599013 Play button 387593922 387598993 387599643 387615043 387623093 387677031. As I said before, there is no real warfare between humans and extraterrestrials. Warfare implies a political and diplomatic vector that does not exist. This entire issue cannot be summarized by diplomatic, military, or political thinking. There is an ontological disconnect that humans have when they try to understand ETI across the board, and this is why the mission of the AOOC has not yielded any progress towards understanding extraterrestrial life for its entire history. Humans are still functioning in the paradigm where an ET vehicle penetrating our personal space is instant grounds to react with military capability. These beings do not see space we inhabit as human, since they do not have a sense of a species' right to lay claim to what is nature. They absolutely comprehend we are territorial, but they simply don't see that as a good reason for respecting our boundaries when they operate on another level of laws that place the order of the universe above their ambitions. It's the same reason why they continue to operate around Earth peacefully while we attack them in self-defense. They have accepted a paradigm where the cost of losing a single-purpose designed probe to our overzealous military is infinitesimal compared to their capability and wisdom. We are taking a bucket of water out of the ocean to punish that ocean for getting us wet. That's how I see it anyway. There has never been loss of life or property as a result of confrontations with entities beyond Earth. 137 KB. Project Bright Horizon. This is an operation focused on the defense of Earth's strategic assets from extraterrestrial or deep space adversaries. They call the shots for destruction of ET assets that stray too close to orbit. Most recent ships in the ASC were commissioned as part of muster efforts in Bright Horizon. Most of the outer planet's infrastructure was also created as part of this project in order to allow development of deep space industry. Space Intel Division. All information relating to the activities of AOOC are stored in data black sites at various Lagrange points around the system. These are quantum computer databases that function with a technology called Aurora, which allows energetic particles in the magnetic reconnection regions of planets with magnetic fields to be observed as a means to transmit data. Apparently there is a natural entanglement effect that we take advantage of. These databases are redundant, so the safest ones at the edge of the system are updating in constant real-time with data feeds set up on Earth. This system forms the backbone of interstellar communication as well, though in practice this has been more difficult. Planetary systems must be magnetically connected to communicate in this way, and only nearby stars have this link. Space Force does in fact promote in the way I described in order to fill the numerous positions that are still open. I can see how coming from another service you might find this questionable, but I urge you to do your own research on how quickly the USSF has promoted its current officer corps. As I said before, I am not willing to discuss details of my career for obvious reasons. My safety is worth more than your curiosity. Any other questions about the nature of operations will not only be something I can answer but is certainly more interesting and important than my life. Compared to the time it took and the amount of money, JWST is objectively an overpriced garbage can. Given the time and cost, it should have been far more robust than what it eventually ended up being. Of course, people participating and communicating with the public are going to gas it up. If they expressed any disappointment, that would be adopted by people like you. People like yourself really need to stop with the "but they said so" attitude. That mindset has to be one of the most obsequious and harmful mindsets of modern times. We're talking about over $10 billion, roughly 3 times the cost of Hubble when adjusted for inflation, here for what truly is marginal return. The public-facing operations of any large institution is quite literally always going to try and spin things in the best way possible. This is just simple common sense. There are several major off-world installations, with the smallest being manned stations that serve as way stations for interstellar traffic and launches from Earth. The largest of these has just under 200 crew. The Moon has 2 widely dispersed facilities. On the facing side in the Kepler-Dorsum region there is a concealed launch complex. This is linked via underground rail lines to a small factory that draws resources from gas and liquid stockpiles occupying several dozen kilometers of lava tubes. There have been occasions when weather conditions have been manipulated to reduce visibility of the Moon during high-tempo operations. On the dark side there is a smaller legacy base built in the early 1970s. This site is no longer active and mostly serves to protect abandoned facilities left by the Soviets. It's possible other nations or older groups have similarly decrepit bases there, though I never confirmed this. There are a few other infrastructure features on the Moon, a network of numerous, several million, small CubeSats that provide real-time monitoring of the Moon at centimeter resolutions. There are also long tethers that sit in orbit and use electrogravitic effects to spin and change altitude. These are used to boost cargo into transfer orbits with Earth and Mars and also to receive cargo. The electrogravitics problem is a synthesis of trying to build a capable design on a low budget. Attempting to build something functional is not that difficult, but making the systems efficient and capable of moving more mass gets expensive fast. These features make shutting down these projects in the private sector relatively easy. Most of ERP's contact with science institutions occurs towards this end. Some modern satellites use electrogravitic systems openly, but this technology is misrepresented in the SM to the extent that the engineers who actually build the systems and maintain them on mission don't realize their Biefeld-Brown ionic tether mechanism is actually anti-gravity. Electromagnetism's relationship with gravity is intentionally misconstrued by the SM. You've done basic research into the topic and you likely understand that the inertial analog used to cancel gravity and electrical attraction is achieved by creating regimes of repulsion that reciprocate along gravity and m. As you implied, the easiest way to do this is in terms of a vehicle system is to produce 2 or more contra-rotating m fields and use frequency as a throttle. I said this is an engineering problem because you'll realize there are different solutions to maximizing the effect. You could simply spin 2 polarized disks with minimal separation between them, or you could use a vortex of charged liquid metal. Alternatively, you can engineer material that produces rapidly oscillating M patterns by using nanostructures. This is how you get to discussion of anti-gravity metamaterials that gets thrown out so often without context. Another way to think about making anti-gravity efficient is to iterate on the simplest design with procedural complexity. Take your 2 electromagnetic disks and place 100 smaller charged disks on its surface that also rotate. Then 100 on each of those. Unless you started with a massive disk, you enter very small scales very quickly with this approach.
Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile
cozy on down to the Atomic Shaman Trading Post. We have t-shirts, decals, refrigerator magnets and other swag for sale. What better way to show your support for the show? Our merch can only be found on t.pub/link/Atomic Shaman Trading Post.
Like, share, subscribe and be sure to check the notification bell. Follow the Atomic Shaman on Twitter at Motel and RV Park. Listen to Paranormal Green Text Stories on Atomic Shaman TTS on YouTube. Catch the live streams of Atomic Shaman Sweat Lodge only on Rumble.